Um, as I said last week, what I try to do is put out a short little screencast like this one on Monday or Tuesday afternoons, basically to give us a chance for me, a chance to summarize what I see as the main takeaways from the week before. Gives us all a chance to sort of reflect on what we learned, and allows me to give you a few pointers as you get started in your work for the upcoming module. This week, I'd like to start with just a few housekeeping things. I'm going to work to identify a time for a non-credit Zoom call. These are really effective because it allows us to kind of get together and have a more conversational environment. Looks like I'm going to try to do that on Thursday afternoons based on availability. I know many of you work and that makes it difficult. If I can get enough people to sort of hold up the conversation, I'll record it and make it available to those of you who can't make it. But I'm sort of working on finalizing that. I've also been asked to release the details of the final paper so you can get a look at it and get started on it. I've appended that to this email announcement. And I've also done the same thing for the writing assignment that's coming up next week, so you can get a chance to develop your thoughts on that before you actually have to sit down and write it. Two other things were just general observations. One, I got a few questions about videos. They are encouraged, as I hope you've started to notice. Seeing my ugly mug every once in a while hopefully gives the class a sense of community. I am a human being. I am paying attention. I know who you are. I am talking to you rather than just long lists. But I know it's not always feasible and not everybody's comfortable, and that's fine. If you do want to use a video, record it directly into Canvas right there in the little box to make it easier on everybody else, but realize that you're not pressured. Also, they don't have to be perfect. I just point out we got to see Taylor's cat, a few other things. You probably can hear my kids in the background right now. Life happens. That's completely fine. The point is not for you to project an air of professionalism. The point is for us to have a sense of community, right? And for the next 8 weeks, we're going to be part of each other's lives. So if life shows up in your videos, that's completely fine. And then also just a last little thing. Many of you, it's the first time in the program, or maybe haven't taken a lot of courses with us. Make sure you follow the directions very carefully, so you make sure you get the most amount of points possible. Make sure you're posting in both the discussion forum and following up, right? So a few takeaways, right? Things that I thought were really great in the discussion forum last week that really will feed into how we go about the next few weeks of the class. One is the difference between the budget, the National Security Strategy, NSS, and the NDS, the National Defense Strategy. It did a lot of work here. Blake did a really fantastic job of giving us all a lot of detail about the NDS and how it relates to a threat like China, right? And illustrating how complex and developed that planning is. He was also right to point out that a lot of defense planning is done in secret, right? Which means us analysts really do try to read the tea leaves of the NDS and the NSS. And these were points well taken, right? There's a lot of strategic planning being done about how to address lots of threats. But I think that Blake's amount of detail reads very well up against Taylor's rebuttal, right? Her suggestion that, yeah, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of resources, that's a focus that doesn't necessarily translate well into other areas. Focusing on a sort of navy that can fight in China is not necessarily going to function as well against sort of operations in the Middle East, and this is kind of the problem, right? The NSS and this is a general criticism of national security strategies. They've become laundry lists. Everything bad and evil about the world that we don't like, that we fear, that we wish would go away, are all sort of treated equally, or at least all show up on this list. And the problem and the criticism is that this doesn't get us in a position where we can make intelligent sort of decisions about how to spend our money, where to put our resources, and really leverage our strengths, right? This is a big criticism that has floated around the Defense Department since the War on Terror, which was, look, we're not set up to fight these wars well. We're set up to fight large competitors like China and Russia. It's hard to do both at the same time, and that has a lot to do with why we've been less than effective and many fronts. You should be allowing us to focus on things that really matter. And that's the criticism, right? And the argument is that in a country like the United States, the direction of our national security should be defined by politicians, right? It should be defined by the democratically elected Congress and the presidency. They're the ones who are supposed to identify the threats. That's the NSS. And you can see why that is a problem under the current conditions. It's then the Defense Department's job to make a plan for how to do that, right? That's supposed to be the NDS, right? And that should really focus on taking those threats that the government has identified for our armed forces and planning a way to deal with them. Then the budget should come, right? Then Congress has given a list of what the Defense Department needs in order to conduct its NDS, and then it's supposed to operate as a check, and it's supposed to make reasoned approximations of what is and is not going to get funding and appropriations. We do it sort of everywhere, and this process has largely been difficult to model, right? And I think that Kat, Taylor, and Zartasha all talk about how, and they brought up one of the core arguments, is that because we haven't faced clear external nation state threats, our sense of security and international relations has wandered, right? I also think Kat and Taylor really modeled a really great engagement in their thread. They took an observed effect, right, this disjoint, and they showed how it was produced by the institutional systems, and they leveraged the reading from Glennon as a foundation, right? I thought that's a really good one. And Kat's structuring of her post was really effective. I think it would bear some use to go back and take a look at that thread before you get started this week, because that's exactly what we're going for. That's the kind of interaction that I'm really hoping to see in the discussion forums, where we can leverage experience and understanding, right? Something like Blake, but all of you have your own areas of strength, leveraging those, right? Identifying an effect that we want to talk about. Each of the discussion forums have been designed to provoke that, right? And you'll find that throughout the course. But then saying, well, how does the reading help me understand this? How does this effect help me critique the reading? That kind of interaction, right? So really focusing on that fit, I think, is really important. And also I'd point out that Zartasha and Claudia really brought a lot of really interesting material from outside of the course. Now, that's not necessarily fair on its face to those of you, this might be your first class. Actually, now that I think of it, Blake did it as well, right? To those of you who this is your first course, maybe this is a new subject area, so on and so forth. But all of you are graduate students. All of you have experience with some level of bureaucracy or government or policy making or something that you can sort of bring in, right? And don't hesitate to do that, right? Zartasha really was great about bringing in the sort of nested idea of changes in the international system, institutions, systems, and so on and so forth, right? Before you get all worried up, don't worry about it. Zartasha's almost done the program, but that's sort of like one of the ways in which the analysis can really build itself. So don't be afraid to bring in the tools that you have. As we get ready for this week, big chunks of reading, right? We're going to engage with sort of the progression, right? And one of the things that we're really starting to talk about now is this idea that actually how the United States thinks about its national security has not stayed the same since the founding, right? It has changed. It has actually changed quite a lot. It has changed in response to our growing position. It has morphed from something that really was thinking about the United States as a peripheral power. Jefferson's famous quote about avoiding foreign entanglements was actually born out of the idea that, look, we cannot hang with the European great powers in a war, so don't bother, right? Don't get into it. And plus, their war seemed to be pretty intractable. At least they did at that time, right? It really changed as we grew into a great power, right? Between World War I and World War II. Changed again when we became a hegemon after World War I and the Cold War. So this has a history, and why it's important to understand this history is that history will color how we think of the world today. That's not always bad. There are lessons to be learned from that. But it is important to make you reticent of that, right? To understand that just because we do something one way and that we've done it that way for a while doesn't necessarily mean it still lines up with the nature of our power, of our role in the international system, or even the nature of the threats that we face, right? We might be inheriting it. So that's really important. Just to note that the only discussion this week is the discussion. But I will have some material for you about the upcoming papers as well. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. Looking forward to seeing you all in the discussion forums. You'll be hearing from me again Thursday before the discussion forums are due. Have a great night.